Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Roar of the Lions. We have a very special podcast. Football is just around the corner. So here on Roar of the Lions, we are looking at the NFC North, and we're taking a bit of a view from the enemy. And tonight, I'm very grateful to have Ryan from Bear Down Report with us to talk Chicago Bears. How you doing, Ryan?
Steve, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it, and ready to talk some smack about the NFC North. Let's do it, man.
We've got a lot to talk about. So you're over in Chicago at the moment?
Yes, I am. Just outside in the suburbs. Yep.
And so my first question I have to ask, and this is a bit of a loyalty test for you in terms of how you feel about Chicago. And I'm not telling you how to live your life or what choices to make, but just think about the city of Cincinnati. You're Ryan Dengel. There's got to be an opportunity there. You could be Dengel the Bengal. Are you not tempted by
that? No, not even a little bit. I've been to Cincinnati. It's a nice little town. It's for the little downtown that they have. Sure, it's good for them. And no, Bengals. No, I'm gonna go ahead and pass on that one.
It just rolls off the tongue though.
It does. It does
seems
indeed,
fated,
yes.
but no. Okay, stick with the Bears. And
yeah,
let's talk a bit about Bear Down Report. So you said you've been going just over a year.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible, Steve, that I was really fortunate to be able to start the Bear Down Report with Mike Page, our founder, and a few other guys. And it's really just kind of exploded, especially over the last couple of months. We've been blown away we have a whole new set of Twitter followers, subscribers, listeners to our podcast, watchers of the videos that we put out, all the content. We've got a lot of stuff. It's kind of that one-stop shop for all things Chicago Bears, and it's been a fun ride, and we're just really excited, and opportunities like this, to connect with people from all over the world.
It's always good to talk with other fans. And what's the kind of differential for you then at Bear Down Report? What do you like to? What's your kind of niche that you kind of got for yourself?
So I am the host of the Bear Down Report podcast, but I also do a bit of writing as well. We do both a post-game show, as well as I usually try to line up a guest when talking about, whoever the Bears are playing that week. I'll get to kind of bring them in, as well as been fortunate enough to have some historians and actually quite a few people from the UK. And we actually even have one of our writers is actually from Melbourne, Australia. And so he's writing about the Chicago Bears in Melbourne, Australia, just like you guys are writing over in the UK. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it feels like the NFL has really grown internationally, and I think possibly games in Germany soon that will bring a whole new language to the NFL. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with that.
I've heard so many German fans are diehard NFL fans, and maybe that goes back to NFL Europe. I'm not really sure, but I'd love to see it, man. See the game expand.
Cool. And let's just start before we get into kind of 2021. Let's cast our minds back to last season. It seems so long ago. And just a bit of a thought and a few takeaways from last season. So, the Bears got off to this incredible start. It's such an overused term, roller coaster season. But, hey, last season was crazy for the Bears. You got off to a 5-1 start. Everyone was kind of saying, the Bears are massive frauds, but then you then beat Tampa Bay. You absolutely terrorized Tampa Bay. Made Brady look very average. Yeah, before. I'm sure you'll come back to that in a sec. And then you had this like incredibly bad run of like 6 games, but then you picked it up at the end, finished 8-8, scraped into the playoffs as the sort of 7th team, and kind of like came to a stop. You came up against the Saints. What are the kind of takeaways from you last season? Now that you've had a bit of time to reflect, do you look at with sort of more fondly, or maybe annoyed that it kind of finished the way it did?
Steve, that's a great question. I think 8-8, it's not possible anymore, which is just crazy to think about. I'm still having a hard time with that, but I just don't think it was good enough. I think that Bears fans were really upset. I think we all knew that it wasn't a real playoff run, but the people that look at Matt Nagy, the Chicago Bears head coach, and they say, This guy has made the playoffs 2 out of 3 years that he's been with Chicago. I think a lot of Bears fans are calling into question that, thinking Vic Fangio's defense was the one that really carried the Chicago Bears in 2018.
Yeah.
2019, they had quite a fall off. And then in 2020, they snuck in with an extra playoff spot that really wasn't a playoff spot. They lost to the Saints. And actually, the finish of the season was a brutal loss to the Green Bay Packers and then a brutal loss to the Saints. Bears fans kind of thought the sky was falling, especially as they signed Andy Dalton to a $10 million contract. If it wasn't for the 2021 draft, I don't know how Bears fans would be feeling going into this season, but things made a big change.
Yeah. So when I kind of look at, I kind of study the media and see what's going on the fan sites and the news sites, the Bears pre-season is very much split by one certain point, because pre-draft, oh my God, it's a burning dumpster fire of a pre-season, because
100%.
You've got the whole trying to make a play for Russell Wilson, that kind of all blowing up, massive bust, sort of exposed by the media. I can't remember where they had a meeting. It was like the most remote location, but it seemed that every single NFL correspondent seemed to find out about it. He then went for Kenny Golladay, and he ended up going to the Giants. Ryan Pace then goes on this kind of like dumpster dive of kind of like free agents, which we'll come on to in a minute. But then the draft just seems to have, and cutting Kyle Fuller, which was, I think at one point Eddie Jackson tweeted out like a facepalm emoji and then kind of deleted it. But you can kind of see how the players are feeling about this. But then the draft seems to have cured everything.
Man, this is true Bears fashion, Steve. I'm not making this up. I forgot about Russell Wilson until you said that right now. That's how long this offseason has been, and that's how ecstatic we are. I mean, you could see it, the shirt that I'm wearing, Justin Fields. The hype is real. Bears fans were ready to burn it to the ground. Mitchell Trubisky had a lot of flaws. I think there are a lot of Bears fans, myself included, that thinking that if given the right opportunities, you could have won more games with him. But hey, it didn't happen. He's gone. He's in Buffalo. He's a backup now. Kenny Galladay, that one was a bit of a head scratcher, considering Bears fans love Allen Robinson and they want to see him signed to a long-term deal. Going into the draft, I think every Bears fan was thinking the same thing. Unless the Bears pick up one of these top quarterbacks and somehow an offensive tackle, we're ready to burn this thing to the ground. You spend $10 million on Andy Dalton and you lose Kyle Fuller. At a point, I'm thinking, why? I'm going to burn my jerseys to the ground. What are you guys thinking? But now, somehow, some way, Ryan Pace was able to land both Justin Fields and Tevin Jenkins. Every Bears fan was thinking, hey, at 20, if the Bears draft Tevin Jenkins, they'll be pretty pleased with that. Somehow, some way, Ryan Pace was able to deliver both Justin Fields and Tevin Jenkins, obviously losing a whole lot of mid-round draft picks. But man, the hype is real, and early reports sure seem to be trending well for Justin Fields. Tevin Jenkins hasn't yet taken the field, but it is still a little bit too early to just hit the panic button about that one.
Yeah, the thing with the draft and I guess like the machinations of Ryan Pace is, I always think with Ryan Pace, there's a yin and a yang. So, you draft Tevin Jenkins at number 2 in the second pick when everyone had projected him mid to late first round. So that's a huge upside. But then you let go Charles Leno. And I think you saved £9 million in cap space. But all of a sudden, you're putting all this pressure on Jenkins. He's the left tackle now. You don't have another left tackle.
It's a little concerning for sure. But I also think, and I don't know how many of my friends that are Bears fans are going to agree with this, is that I don't think there are super high expectations for this season. It is development. It is an opportunity. I want Justin Fields to play, but I want Justin Fields to play when he's ready and when the opportunity is right. And Andy Dalton is not known for his mobility, while Justin Fields is known for his mobility. Obviously, the tackle situation is a big question mark. I think that Tevin Jenkins is going to be a really good starter. Obviously, you guys got Sewell. You've got the better tackle. There's no two ways about that. But I think down the road, maybe 2 years, I think maybe possibly even next year, the Bears could have a really solid situation. They were also really high in Larry Borum, getting him out of the 5th round out of Missouri, just a mauler, just a big bully at tackle. And, having two rookies on your outside is not a recipe for winning a lot of games. However, you look at Tampa Bay and Tristan Wirfs, right? They were able to get away all the way to the Super Bowl and win it. Even though if you do get a chance to see what Khalil Mack did to Tristan Wirfs, I think it's illegal in about 3 different countries, throwing him around like a rag doll.
He kind of like hip tossed him, didn't he? It was like in the Royal Rumble when they like hip toss someone over the top rope. It was a bit like that.
Yes. Absolutely. It was fun. It was fun for all Bears fans to watch. Obviously, we cried that that team won the Super Bowl and we beat them. But hey, you know what? That's the nature of the NFL.
Yeah, that game, I think it was week 5, 20 against 19. I think you just scraped the win. But I mean, Brady was shook. I mean, there's no doubt Brady was shook. I think you had like about 19, 20 pressures. Khalil Mack, I think, had 2 sacks. It was as though you'd drawn up the blueprint for how to beat Tampa Bay, but no one else seemed to be able to execute it.
Especially not Green Bay. I just want to put that out there just one time. The heart of the Bears defense is their front 7. And especially with Eddie Goldman coming back, and I don't want to hop too much here, but there's a lot of cause for optimism because Bilal Nichols, who was kind of taking that position last season, got better and better and better and better as the year went on. And so, giving Khalil Mack an opportunity to do what he does best, which is rush the passer. I also think, thinking about the 2020 season, Khalil Mack was asked to do something that he's not fantastic at, which is like dropping into coverage. He's not a coverage linebacker. He's a pass rusher. And watching him do that, Bears fans were very, very frustrated, but it didn't happen in the Tampa Bay game. And I actually even think Tampa Bay took a little bit of a look at that game to see what really unbelievably good pressure can do. And as you watch them in the playoffs, that's what they were able to do so very well.
Yeah, I just want to finish covering the draft. We're definitely going to come on and talk about the defense. So I just want to, from your point of view, I think you mentioned about your expectations from this season, and you want to build, you want to give Fields time to settle in. The problem I see is that's like a real juxtaposition with what Nagy and Pace have to deliver. I mean, it is win now. Like when you look at the draft capital that they've given away their like 1st round pick next year as well, like they have to deliver. So, I mean, how many games do you think Dalton will start before they're looking at Fields?
I think everything changed the night of the draft. And what I mean by that is I truly believe that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy were both on the hot seat until they drafted Justin Fields and Tevin Jenkins. They get at least one more season. Now, if Andy Dalton reverts back to, his last couple of seasons, I mean, he's going to get pulled at some point, but it would appear that Mitch Trubisky was put out way before he was ready, and having Mike Glennon as a mentor is not a mentor.
He was like a bridge that collapsed.
100%. I think Andy Dalton can hold down the fort, especially with some of the offensive weapons that the Bears have. I know that when people hear me say that, they may chuckle a little bit, but there are some actual weapons on this team. And, I think that while fans want Justin Fields right now today to start playing every single game and to break every Bears record, I think deep down we all know that the 2021 season will probably more than likely be a developmental season, and that the following year, looking at that 2022 season, is when Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace will truly be on the hot seat. That season, I think, is more of a do it or you're fired season. Now, let's say they only win 3 or 4 games, which I just don't see happening. Then, of course, I think we're looking at a vastly different story.
But that's the kind of question, isn't it? Is if they play Andy Dalton all season and you end up missing the playoffs, can they legitimately turn around and say, well, it's a developmental season? Or do you think, I mean, bearing in mind the Chicago media can be kind of like brutal. Do you not think that, say, if they go 2-4 in the first 6 games, there would just be such a clamor to start Fields?
I think the Bears front office, the McCaskey family especially, the owners of the Bears, have people that they really like. And I think that they're willing to hold on a little bit longer than what Bears fans may like. The Jerry Angelo, the former GM of the Chicago Bears, was here for far too long. And I think, they develop relationships with these individuals. I think Ryan Pace, regardless of what happens this season, is here for sure. They really like him. They've invested a lot of time and effort into him. And he's, like some of the ideas that he's brought, developing House Hall into the place where the Bears have training camp, all that stuff screams Ryan Pace. And I really believe that he's got a slightly longer leash than Matt Nagy. Matt Nagy, on the other hand, the offensive genius, has yet to produce a good offense. And so if you really pressed me, I would say Ryan Pace has at least 2 more years where Matt Nagy is a little bit more on that hot seat. Exactly what you're kind of talking about, Steve.
Yeah, and I mean, let's not forget that Andy Dalton isn't the worst quarterback in the NFL. And, he had a bad season last year, but he was at a terrible Cowboys team. But I mean, if you think about the Around the NFL podcast, they always joke that, like, on the Dalton scale, that Dalton is like the absolute median of all quarterbacks. He kind of is the midpoint, and I don't think that's like an unfair comparison. So a middle of the road Dalton has got to be better than a really up and down Trubisky.
Or a really bad Nick Foles. Nick Foles played abysmally for most of the season last year. Now, we know he's going to blame the offensive line that was hurt for most of the year, but he just didn't play very well. And
but he did have the high. If you look at the fixtures of Foles and Trubisky, Foles played in like the real tough fixtures at the start of the season, and Trubisky came in at the end when you're playing like Houston and Jacksonville.
Absolutely. I think there's a few things. If you look at their career numbers, they're very similar. Like if you just look at in terms of pure stats, quarterback rating, and all those things, they're very, very similar. The difference is that Mitch Trubisky's ability to run with the football opened up the run game for David Montgomery later on in the season. In today's NFL, unless you're Tom Brady, right, you need the ability to truly run the football. And if you look, when Mitch Trubisky is inserted back into the lineup, David Montgomery explodes onto the scene, right? 5th in the NFL in rushing, 1,070 yards, 8 touchdowns. The guy was electric, and Bears fans are super excited about, him kind of coming back in the offense. And just kind of going back to your point, I think a lot of Bears fans truly believe that even a mediocre quarterback like Andy Dalton could elevate this offense enough to win them in maybe a few more games.
The funniest stat is that when you beat the Bucks, the total rushing yards in that game for the Bears was 35.
Yeah, that's not Chicago Bear football. And I know that sounds absurd to say, but when Matt Nagy ran the ball 7 times against the Saints in 2019, Bears fans were livid, especially if you've got a guy like David Montgomery who needs more carries, and the more carries he gets, the better he is at running the football. I think that's another thing is we're hoping, because Matt Nagy's past would seem that he wants to throw the football. But the 3-headed monster of David Montgomery, Damian Williams, and Tariq Cohen, that sounds like a run game. And it could be a run first offense. We'll be curious to see what kind of happens with that.
Yeah, I mean Montgomery, he went off for like over 1,000 yards, 4.3 yards per attempt. So he had a great season, but the depth chart does look. I mean, Damian Williams is kind of injury prone, so it it's a little sparse behind him, and same with wide receiver. You've obviously just traded. I think Anthony Miller's gone to the Texans.
Thankfully, very, very happy about that decision.
But so that kind of leaves Allen Robinson, who's obviously kind of like a cut above at receiver. But that's quite a big ask for sophomore like Darnell Mooney to kind of step up to wide receiver too this year.
Well, I would say that Bears fans are really excited, and I think rightfully so, about Darnell Mooney. If you watch Darnell Mooney's, he's got the speed, and you have to have the speed in the NFL, but he's really got it. I think the thing that stands out more about his game that doesn't get enough notice is his ability to run routes. There were more than a few times where he would get wide open and Mitch Trubisky would miss him, because Mitch Trubisky's strength is not the deep ball. And I think that, having over 600 yards, setting the Bears record for rookie receivers, has a lot of Bears fans very excited about it. That Darnell Mooney appears to be in the right place at the right time and make really good cuts, whereas Anthony Miller was supposedly never in the right place. That the guy had great speed, great talent, but just couldn't get his head around the playbook. And that's not a guy that I want to stay on this team, especially with the fact that he punched a player wearing a helmet. After he was warned, don't punch the guy wearing the helmet. And so
wasn't he the second Bears receiver to?
Steve, that hurts that you know that. Yes. As a matter of fact, he was. Javon Wims, who is also still on the Bears as of right now, but I think a lot of Bears fans think that he might be a cut or a late, preseason trade. We'll see what happens with that.
I guess it's a bit like when you get a firework and it's hot, kids, and they touch it and ow, and then someone else has to touch it just to see if it's hot. It's a bit like that. One punched. Is it the Saints guy, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was the same player, which they'd played earlier in the season. They'd been warned about, and it just didn't work out. Just really quick, I think Bears fans are also very excited about Jimmy Graham. When I say that, I think most NFL fans are going to laugh out loud, and they're like, "You can't be excited about Jimmy Graham." Do you know that Jimmy Graham had 9 touchdown receptions last season, including the playoffs? And then Cole Kmet, his development, obviously having Tree Cohen back out of the backfield. I think there are some weapons on this team.
Let's not forget Jesse James.
Jesse James seems to be lighting it up. Seems to be lighting it up in camp right now. People keep talking about it. And then Damiere Byrd and Marquise Goodwin, who are, let's just put it mildly, fast 4.2 guys.
Yeah, those guys are track stars. Absolutely. I mean, if they can keep Marquise Goodwin fit, I mean, he's going to be a massive asset. And yeah, Bird as well. I think he was at the Patriots last year and had like one of his better seasons.
Yeah, about 600 yards. If you get that kind of production, again, that replaces Anthony Miller with a guy who probably will be in the right place at the right time and won't hopefully punch a player wearing a helmet.
I've attempted to get Marquise Goodwin to my fantasy team for about the last 2 years, and I just keep giving up because he's like always injured. But maybe this year, he'll stay healthy.
Fingers crossed.
And O-line, obviously you've got Jenkins has come in. Cody White had a really good season last year. Do you feel you've got enough on the O-line to kind of establish the run now?
I think the two biggest question marks that the Bears are having right now is offensive line and their secondary. Mm-hmm. And so offensive line.
Oh, we're going to talk about the secondary, don't worry.
Yeah, for sure. I think the offensive line, in an ideal world, you have Tevin Jenkins, and then maybe you have someone with a little bit more experience on the right side. But the interior, and I don't know that this gets enough credit. I think that once this was solidified last year of Cody Whitehair, Sam Mustipher, and James Daniels coming back, that interior 3 of guard, center, guard is really good and bodes well for a good running game. But obviously those tackles are a big question mark. And in today's NFL, that's not a good thing to be worried about what your tackles are going to do. So we're going to see. I wouldn't be shocked if after that, third preseason game, fourth preseason game, if the Bears try to pick up an experienced tackle, just as someone that either is a mentor to Jenkins or maybe kind of secures that spot for this next season.
Yeah, and I think looking at the roster, if anything happens to Montgomery or Robinson, that's the problem. Is the depth chart's quite thin.
I do understand exactly what you're saying. I don't disagree with that. But again, I think, if you talk to Bears fans, Darnell Mooney is the one, because it's long term. He's so young that we're really excited about. Khalil Herbert coming in as a rookie this season. Ryan Pace, for all of his faults, which there are many, anywhere between 4th, 5th, 6th round, he has found some absolute gems. Thinking about Jordan Howard, thinking about Tariq Cohen, think about Eddie Jackson, right? All of these guys that he's found have been really good. And so Khalil Herbert, Daz Newsome coming in as rookies, both of them coming in the 5th round, has Bears fans maybe a little more excited than they should be.
And who do you think is going to be calling the plays this year? Because obviously Nagy handed over to Bill Lazor, but that wasn't a great success. I mean, I'm not quite sure why Nagy handed over in the first place, because that kind of like is a vote of no confidence in himself. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, Steve, actually, and that's one I'm going to actually really strongly disagree with you. I think Matt Nagy is a very good play designer, but he's not a very good play caller. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have any consistency in what he's trying to do. He doesn't have a rhythm to it. Bill Lazor comes in, and all of a sudden the Bears offense starts clicking, start doing the things that Mitch Trubisky does well, the play action, running the game, the run game, and all that stuff. And then there were rumors towards the very end of the season that, again, that Green Bay and Saints game, that Matt Nagy had taken play calling back. I would like very much to see Bill Lazor, especially if Andy Dalton is throwing the ball. Yeah. I'd like to see a reunion with those two. In 2016, right, Andy Dalton has 4,000 yards, 18 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. That's Bill Lazor. Those two clearly have a chemistry together and calling plays. And so if that's the case, I'd like to see that.
Good stuff. So let's turn our attention to the defense. So think back 2018. It was the second coming of the monsters of the Midway. You just had that phenomenal season, got to the playoffs. Khalil Mack absolutely terrorized the entire NFL. According to PFF, you ranked 5th on defense last season. And people kind of felt there was a bit of a drop off. But when you think about the disruption in terms of dropouts and Akeem Hicks coming back from injury, Eddie Goldman, do you kind of feel that the defense was maybe just criticized because it had to win games because the offense was struggling, and maybe the defense was asked to do a bit much?
They were definitely asked to do way too much. And then losing Akeem Hicks as well as Eddie Goldman, to opting out for COVID reasons. I mean, that really hurts. Akeem Hicks is maybe not the best player on the Chicago Bears defense, but he is the heart of that defense. And then the other thing is Chuck Pagano. Chuck Pagano is a good guy, and I applaud him for all of his efforts, but he was not Vic Fangio. The difference between the defensive play calling of the two is quite staggering, which is why a lot of us are very curious to see what's going to happen with Sean Desai. Sean Desai is the longest tenured assistant Bears coach. The guy is like next level smart. He's got a PhD. I mean, he's crazy smart. And Vic Fangio really wanted him as part of his defensive staff in 2019, and the Bears blocked the move, which you kind of thought, why is that happening? And now with him sitting in that top spot, we're kind of very hopeful that happens. Like going back to what we were talking about earlier, the Bears front seven is, especially the Bears defensive line, thinking about Bilal Nichols, Akeem Hicks, Mario Edwards Jr., and just kind of going down the list. If the front 3, 4, right, does their job, the front 7, does their job, the Bears defense could be good, which I know we're going to be talking about that secondary. Will hopefully maybe cover some of those holes in the secondary that we're a little worried about.
Yeah, just one word of warning. We tried a defensive genius, a rocket scientist at Detroit, and it didn't work out very well.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. No, I think the one thing that we're hoping for is that Desai is more aggressive than Chuck Pagano, who always was trying to do this bend but don't break.
Yeah.
But there was a whole lot of breaking that ended up happening after a while.
So Pagano retired in the off season, and
He
Desai's come
did.
in, and I think he's brought
He
in a guy called
retired.
Chris retired. And he's
Yeah.
brought in this guy called Chris Rumpf, who was the outside linebackers coach at the Texans, who's been coaching JJ Watt. So that could be an interesting addition.
Well, we're hoping that with Robert Quinn being healthy this season, which he definitely was not healthy last season, and then a name that really isn't on a lot of people's radar is Trevis Gibson. Trevis Gibson was a late round draft pick, and if you look at pictures, like just pictures of the guy, and I understand that physical attributes aren't everything, the guy has put on insane amounts of muscle over the offseason. And just thinking that if there's anyone to push Robert Quinn, to have any kind of pass rush outside of Khalil Mack, could make the Bears a very, very dangerous team yet again on defense.
Yeah, we said that when Jared Davis muscled up in the last off season, and again that didn't work out well. I'm seeing some familiarities, but we won't get bogged down in the lines just yet.
No. The only thing I will say to that, my friend, is that you guys have been able to do offense. We've been able to do defense, and for some reason, the other teams it just doesn't transfer for some reason.
It's very frustrating, isn't it?
Very much so.
But yeah, I mean, Eddie Goldman. I think Eddie Goldman's one of those guys that does all the dirty work in the trenches and doesn't really get the credit, and maybe the stats don't really like play out what a good player he is. But yeah, I mean, like Mario Edwards Jr. was ranked 3rd by PFF in his position and just had like an absolute monster season. I think the issue is continuity, because I don't think you've had your first choice D-line. I think since the 5th game of 2019 was the last time that everyone was healthy.
Yeah, and it would appear as of right now that they are all healthy. So we're going to see what happens. Now, Akeem Hicks is getting a little bit older, but when he's healthy, when he's 100%, I mean, he's scary. Like I one man to man, like I would, if he was running towards me, I would cower. He's just an intimidating physical specimen, and Eddie Goldman is the same way. And so I think that if those guys can stay healthy, that's the heart of the Bears defense.
Yeah. So Khalil Mack was recently interviewed, and he talked about been in 110 regular season games, only 3 get playoff games, which is not win one. And he said, you don't get too many years in the NFL, too many chances to win ball games, and too many chances to get to the playoffs and go all the way. I understand that now going into year 8, time is of the essence. So, you kind of, he seems to be saying, we need to win now as well. Do you think Mack will still be here in a year's time?
I do. I think the Bears have invested far too much into him to let him go. I think the Bears would very much like to see him finish his career as a Chicago Bear.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's kind of earned that in the short time that he's been here. He's done everything that they've asked him to do, even when he's been injured, and the production has dropped a little bit due to him being asked to do things that are outside of his skill set. I think that the Bears will do better this year than some people are predicting. But I still don't. I think next year is really what they're setting up for, and so we'll see. Roquan Smith is another one that I'm genuinely very, very curious about. If they can figure out a way to get him signed to a long-term deal, he's just kind of continues that tradition of excellent middle linebackers out of the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I mean, he's one player that if I was to pinch one player from your roster, Roquan Smith would be like right up there in terms of who I'd want to bring to the Lions, not just as a linebacker, but his coverage in the secondary is amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah.
But when we were losing a lot of games last season, we really, if you go back and listen to our podcast, you'll hear, hey, what are we still paying attention to at this point? And 2 of our writers said, I still get to watch Roquan Smith play a linebacker, and that is worth the price of admission.
Yeah. And if you've seen the Lions linebacker room at the moment, you'll see why we covered him so much. Yeah, and I think Mack still had 57 pressures and 10 sacks last year. It's this was not like a down year. It was just maybe just a little bit off by his own incredible standards that he set.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I come back, and I don't want to sound like too much like a broken record, but the amount of us Bears fans that were watching and screaming every single time he's dropped back into coverage, that's not what he does. And I understand that sometimes a defense calls for a player to do that, but it was too often that he's not doing what he's being paid very handsomely to do, which is rush the passer. I think he's still a damn good player.
I think you look at the Bears front seven and the absolute strength in there. You look at the linebackers, Roquan Smith, Danny Trevathan, the safety, you mentioned Tashawn Gibson, but I mean, Eddie Jackson is a pretty decent safety. So you're thinking to yourself, this defense is really coming together. And then you look at the cornerback room. Whew, it's, I mean, you've got, Kyle Fuller was like absolutely your number one corner. I think I'm not sure how much you saved. It's about 14 million in cap space. So I guess he kind of had to go.
No, I don't think any Bears fan is going to find a way to justify losing Kyle Fuller.
But
that guy was. I understand that there's a financial component to it, but I think there's a lot of other aging players that the Bears would have liked to see. Hey, thank you so much for your time. He's a guy that you don't hear a lot about because he doesn't say anything. He hardly ever gives interviews. He never said anything, but he was a good corner. He didn't get interceptions, but he also didn't allow a whole lot of completions. And that was the thing that I'm still, you could hear it in my voice, Steve. I'm still upset about losing Kyle Fuller. That guy was everything that you could want in a leader on defense, and they asked him to take a big pay cut, and he said no because he's worth more than that. And so it's really frustrating. I
mean, Jalen Johnson did have a good rookie season, but I mean, particularly in a league with Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, it does seem a big ask to kind of put him into the firing line at cornerback one.
100%, without question. I am of the belief that the Bears front office are thinking that if they can get enough pressure with their front seven, that alleviates some of that pressure, because obviously opposite of Jalen Johnson, who did have a good rookie season, but also that shoulder, that this is the second time he's gotten surgery on that shoulder. That's not a good thing for a guy who's doing a whole lot of tackling. But there is a name out there, and I think Bears fans may be a little higher than they should, but Kindle Vildor didn't play a whole lot last season, but in the time that he did play, he showed flashes that said, hey, this guy could be really good.
He's the sixth round pick, isn't he?
Yes, correct. And honestly, I'm a guy that watches. I love to watch when players get drafted, what happens. And I remember very distinctly, like, reposting a tweet of him getting drafted. And so I love watching guys live their dreams, and he liked it. And so that's one of those things that I am forever linked to this guy. I'm pulling for Kindle Vildor. I think he's got a lot of development to go as well, but I think that he's shown enough flashes that maybe he beats out Desmond Trufant, which as soon as I say that name, you guys will know. I know.
I mean, do you think he can beat out Tease Table?
The Bears right now have more cornerbacks with names that I don't know, Trey Roberson, and guys that have been either drafted highly and haven't worked out, or have shown some upside. I think they're really hoping that one of these guys is going to pan out. But again, maybe just as I said with offensive line, watch for the Bears to maybe either make a move at the offensive line, towards that third preseason game. When I say fourth, there is no more fourth preseason game. Excuse me.
Yeah,
it's going to take me some time. That third preseason game, watch them to try to either make a move at tackle or at cornerback.
Yeah, just going back to your point on Fuller, not getting many interceptions, but when he was targeted, he only allowed 55% completion rate, which I think is like one of the highest in the league.
Thanks, Steve. You're just taking salt and pouring in an open wound, man. Appreciate it. Thank you, dude.
Well, let's just hold that wound open for a bit, because I have to talk about what I can only describe as a dumpster dive of ex-Lions players that you've taken. So let me refresh your memory. So we've got two corners. We've got Tease Tabor, who I think was one of Bob Quinn's biggest draft busts. Desmond Trufant, who I think in the few games that he did manage to limp onto the field, gave up about 13 yards a play. Christian Jones, a linebacker who's kind of neither good at coverage, stopping the run, or pass rushing. Jesse James, who, well, he was kind of there last season, but I don't really know what he did. Is that it? Are there any more? I don't know.
Well, the only thing I'll say to Christian Jones is that actually he played well enough in Chicago to get a contract in Detroit and just kind of fell off. You know, given your guys' history of linebacker play and linebacker development, I don't know that I would really put much stock in Christian Jones coming back, just because I think the Bears are, you know, one of the things that we've done well is linebackers and running backs. And I think, you know, Christian Jones in a reserve role, which he's absolutely brought in to play reserve role, maybe some special teams. I'm okay with that move. For the cornerbacks,
to be honest, I think anyone that turns up at Matt Patricia's door and says that they're a linebacker and is like maybe had about like 400 kilograms of protein, and they'll be like straight in. Yeah, come on, we got a contract for you.
Matt Patricia, man, I was very sad to see him go, and I know Mitch Trubisky was very sad to see him go as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be the Achilles heel of the Bears. If you can sort it out, that's a really good defense this year. It's just a vulnerability, just because, you know, Rodgers and, I mean, Cousins, when he's playing well, you've got some tough wide receiver ones to cover.
Absolutely. Devontae Adams and Justin Jefferson, they are the real freaking deals. You know, I think the one thing is that the Bears have done well against the Minnesota Vikings. And Kirk Cousins only having one win against the Chicago Bears in his entire career. But as for that, you know, that team up north, as we like to call them, man, it stings. And you know, we're way more in the losing season. Obviously, with Rodgers coming back, it is what it is, my friend.
You've just segued beautifully into the NFC North. I think
I did it perfectly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of summed up the Bears, and anyone that we've missed. Is there anyone we've not talked about, like maybe a roster addition or a free agent or someone that's just gone under the radar that you think is going to have a bit of a breakout?
I think like I said, you know, Tayshaun Gibson is the safety, and Trevis Gibson is an outside linebacker. So
okay.
Guys that I would take a look at would be Trevis Gibson. Just maybe keep your eyes on him just to see what happens. And then, man, if Darnell Mooney looks half as good this season with competent quarterback play, I think that the Bears are going to have a really nice 1-2 punch at wide receiver.
Okay, so let's turn our attention to the rest of the NFC North. And it's fair to say there's been a bit of melodrama in Wisconsin, which is it's kind of kept us entertained.
So much.
But with like a crushing inevitability that Rodgers is going to be back week 1. I think it's been like a running joke, but one where the punchline is ultimately sour. That's how I've kind of looked at it.
Well, Steve, can I ask before we get into this too far, did you think he was coming back?
Yeah. I always thought he was coming back.
I think most fans within the NFC North knew he was going to come back. I think we wanted him to not come back.
Yeah.
But I think we all knew he was coming back. Though, if you look at their cap situation for next year, woof, they are in a brutal spot, and it's going to be a big fall. So if they don't make the Super Bowl this year, I mean, as a Packers fan, you just watch out. Those next couple seasons could be really tough for you guys.
Yeah. I've got my take on Rodgers lined up, but I'm just interested to hear your take first. So tell me how you think it played out.
I think he had some legitimate gripes. as much as it pains me to say this, and I think deep down you know the same thing, he's one of the best quarterbacks to play the game over the last, what, 20, 30, 40 years? I mean, maybe even longer than that. The guy is truly special. And I got to give credit to one of our writers, Corey Walsh. She brought this up, which was, if you think about the NFC North Championship game where the Packers decided to kick the field goal instead of giving the ball to Aaron Rodgers, I think that was the final nail in the coffin when he said, are you guys kidding me? What else do I have to do for you? And so, from a front office perspective, he embarrassed them, aired all of their dirty laundry. They have to be really upset about that. But I think if all of us are being truly honest, what did he say that was an absolute falsehood, right? Like where was the lie in what he said?
I think my issue with it is effectively what he's done is he's called out Brian Gutekunst for doing his job, because isn't that what a GM has to do? A GM has to make tough decisions on cap space, on veterans. Green Bay is kind of like a model franchise in terms of how it's been run for many, many years. And that's what a GM does. You have to make those tough decisions. And so I kind of didn't really understand why he was calling them out for making them, because he then read out a list of players that he felt had been like wronged and maligned. And none of those players you were like, why the hell isn't this guy still on the roster? Because they were all kind of, to me, maybe give or take a season, but most of them had been moved on at the right time. And then just to kind of like undermine the argument, and this is where my favorite bit of Rodgers comes out, because Rodgers is like, he's a diva. He's like full of melodrama, borderline narcissist. There's a bit of sort of Machiavellian sort of playing behind the scenes and different narratives, and he's an absolute diva when it comes to all this. So he's talked
having his fiance tweet for him, possibly even that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Constantly complaining about media attention, but then spending his entire off season playing golf with other superstar celebrities. I just need some time away, but I'm going to go and play golf with, I don't know. Yeah. So
yeah.
So he's done all. He's talked about how the franchise is running all these tough decisions, and then the one concession, or that seems to be a kind of vanity project where he says, "I need the 5th best Houston Texans wide receiver on my team." I mean, doesn't that just kind of show how shallow it all is?
Steve, excellent points. But what I would say to that is, think about this. 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks and 2 Super Bowls. That's it. How many trips to the NFC Championship? And I think that guy has earned the right to say, hey, I've helped carry you, literally carry you to not literally. I'm sorry. You understand what I'm saying. He's truly, in a sense, carried that team to the NFC Championship, and sometimes like just on his past ability. And without him, Green Bay, I don't think that's a very good roster. Outside of Devontae Adams, I understand that that they're in love with their running back room. I think the only reason those guys are truly great, I got to be careful here, is because Aaron Rodgers is behind center. So I truly understand exactly what you're saying, but I think one of the things he brought up was these guys weren't even offered contracts, and they didn't ask, hey, like, who do you think we should keep? If a guy has earned that right, and you get so close to the Super Bowl and then you don't make it, I think he does have a bit of gripe in what he's saying.
But I think the other thing that I think that frustrates me is that it's always about himself, and I just don't get any help, because he's only got the best wide receiver, one of the top 5 running backs, like the best left tackle in the NFC. I mean, that's all he's got to work with. So it's always about him, and he needs more weapons. But the reason he's didn't get to a Super Bowl was because Kevin King couldn't cover, and so surely it should be focused on the defense. And I think they took a guy called Eric Stokes with their first pick, who I've heard very mixed kind of things about, but surely the defense is where Green Bay need to invest. But it seems, he's crying and saying he needs Randall Cobb. It just doesn't stack up.
Well, here's the thing, Steve. We're totally in agreement on that. I don't like him. I don't think he's a genuinely good person. I don't think he's someone that I'd be like, hey, let's hang out, right? Like Nick Foles and Andy Dalton, those are two guys. Like if you look at their track record in terms of charity work, even Mitch Trubisky, those are guys I would like to hang out with. Aaron Rodgers is not one of those people. I simply say all of this stuff in regards to his play on the field. As far as a guy, as soon as he's done, I'm happy. Like, okay,
if we're talking about QBs for a beer, I'd love to go out with Phil Rivers.
Yeah, he'd trash talk you the entire time you were there, but he wouldn't swear the entire time.
So I think Rodgers has kind of revealed himself in this offseason, and the whole last dance thing, like you can kind of see where this is going. There's no way he's going to be at Green Bay next year because they need to get some trade value from him.
I am going to try to be careful in how I say this, but the comparison between Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen to Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams is insulting. And I'm not even a big basketball person, but truly one of the greatest basketball players of all time, 6-time, NBA champion, to
3 back-to-back championships, gold medal in the Olympics with the Dream Team.
Man, I'm trying not to get too fired up about this one, Steve, but that really irks me. I understand the sentiment, like, hey, this is going to be our last opportunity to do this together in Green Bay, but find another way to say it. And maybe that's what he was thinking is, oh, this is our last dance, but you don't compare yourself to those two guys. End of discussion.
So what do you think? So I think we're stuck with them. I think we're going to have to put up with his miserable, sulking, sourpuss face for another year. And I'm sure he's going to throw for like 4,000 yards plus. And
with an extra game too.
Absolutely. My question is, what's the rest of the Green Bay locker room thinking? Do you really think that they're going to play for this guy when they know he's desperate to get out? They know he's just looking for an exit. Devontae Adams has obviously turned his head as well. I don't know. It's surely it's going to cause some unrest, particularly when LaFleur calls a play he doesn't like.
Well, then Aaron has the ability to change the play at the line or where else it happens. I think in the NFL, players know that there's a business side and that there is, there's the game. And I think that Aaron Rodgers, again, going back to this, as much as it hurts me to say, he's one of the best to ever play the game, the best to ever play the position. And I know that the guys on that team want to play with him for one more year, whether or not that means that he's sticking around for the long haul or not. He's not my favorite person, but players follow, they would step back and say, hey, one of the best is coming back to play the game with us. We got this opportunity. Let's take advantage of it.
And I mean, one of the things that kind of struck me is with all the talk of Green Bay and the kind of, the last dance with Rodgers and Adams, I do kind of think that maybe the Vikings have been overlooked a bit in terms of when you think about how disrupted their season was last year. They finished up 7-9, but they lost so many close games. That 7-9 could have been 9-7. So they could have easily got ahead of the Bears. I think you played the Bears in about week 14 or 15, and it was you played the Vikings. It was a really, really tight game, and it was just 1 week where Cousins or Dalvin Cook or Justin Jefferson didn't show up, and I think you just sneaked a really narrow win, and that got you in the playoffs ahead of them. But when you look at the kind of pattern with Zimmer, where I think 2015, 17, 19 they made the playoffs, and then 14, 16, 18, 20 they missed out. It's kind of like should be a year where the Vikings challenge, and Jefferson, Thielen, Dalvin Cook, an improved offensive line. I think they've got loads of defensive players back. They had some terrible injuries last season. Anthony Barr, I think, played 2 games and then was out for the season. Kendricks missed the second half of the season. So I kind of really feel the Vikings are going to be pushing. And I think that people, particularly if you look at the betting lines, people are overlooking them now that Rodgers is back and the focus of the attention.
Well, Danielle Hunter, I mean, he wasn't on the roster last season. Him coming back, I mean, that guy is a monster. He's probably the best defender that they have on that team. And so, you know, when you're losing your best player on defense, that'll tend to do it. You know, I think Dalvin Cook is incredible, and they find great ways to use him. You know, I think, you know, of course, a little bit of bragging rights is that Dalvin Cook and Kirk Cousins have not played well against the Chicago Bears, but they're I have a hard time saying Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback. He's so streaky. Yeah. That's not a guy that I would follow. And honestly, with what's going on with their COVID protocols right now, like, you know, how's that going to work right now? There's literally one quarterback in the Vikings quarterback room that can play right now. And, you know, so we'll see about that. I do, Steve, tend to agree with you that I think they're better than people think, but I also know that you know, that sometimes they lose games that they really should win. And, you know, that's not necessarily a recipe. We'll see. I think that, oh my gosh, his name just totally, their head coach. I don't know why. Mike Zimmer. Thank you so much. I think he's a damn good coach, and I think that you know, there's a lot of trust in him in Vikings land. So yeah, I don't dispute that at all. I definitely think that they could surprise a few teams this season.
I kind of also wonder whether having the fans back will help out the Vikings, because I think they've got one of the most intimidating. I don't know if you've been up there, but no. I've never been, but it looks so intimidating, and inside the noise they generate, that must have quite hurt them last season.
Absolutely, very, very much. I think most teams can say that, right? That not having fans in the stands was hurting. But you're right, and in a dome stadium like that, definitely a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. So I think we've finally come to the Detroit Lions. I mean, you know, where do we start? I mean, this is, you know, there should be the peak of this conversation. What thoughts have you got on the Lions? Principal ones. How do you think that we're going to fare this season? And give me your thoughts on the Dan Campbell regime.
You guys know how to pick head coaches that have the most fascinating press conferences of anybody. You know, you've got the ankle biter, you've got the please sit up and talk to me. You know, going back to Jim Schwartz, man, that's not a person I would like to have a beer with, right? So you guys would you like to have a beer with Matt Patricia? No, I would not.
It'd be a very quiet beer.
But Caldwell, that's a guy, like, I don't understand why you guys let him go. I feel like give him 1 or 2 more seasons and maybe that guy could have continued to turn the ship. The one that gets me, and Steve, really, truly, that I think about with the Lions is Matt Stafford. Watching some Lions fans that were happy to see him go, I do not understand that in the slightest. That I've actually seen a couple of fans say that they think Jared Goff will be better than Matt Stafford. I am scratching my head. Like, have you watched Jared Goff play football? So that one, can you explain that to me? Can you explain the optimism for Jared Goff?
Well, I think if you look purely at the statistics, there's actually not that much difference statistically between Stafford and Goff. However, obviously, Stafford's been playing on a pretty poor Lions team, and Goff's been playing for the Rams. Goff obviously was drafted, drafted number 1, and had a poor first season. But then 2017 and 2018 put up some fantastic numbers, and let's not forget, got to a Super Bowl. I know there's been some very average quarterbacks over the time that have got to a Super Bowl. But, Goff did the business in those 2 seasons, but he's obviously had a fallout with McVay. I would imagine McVay is not someone you want to get on the wrong side of. You see that chest puffed out on Hard Knocks. this guy is, the ego has landed with McVay.
100%.
So, but I don't think he's as bad. So I don't think he's as good as people are making out based on the numbers. But I also don't think he's as bad as people are making out. I think he's a kind of Andy Dalton, probably ranked 18th, 20th in the quarterbacks. So, but anyone that says that Matt Stafford, that we're glad to see him go, is just talking utter shit.
So I guess my next question is, so your tight end that really busted onto the scene is Hockenson?
Hockenson, yeah, TJ Hockenson.
Yeah, TJ Hockenson. When he gets double teamed, who is Jared Goff going to throw to? Because I'm almost 40 years old, and I think I might be able to bust into your guys' starting wide receiver core. Sorry, Steve, I love you, man, but dude, I mean, I know when I heard the questions, like when I see Lions fans online that are like, "You guys don't have anybody after Allen Robinson," I'm like, "You guys really are going to talk smack about our wide receiver core?"
I think the words pot and kettle spring to mind here. Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of frustration, is that when obviously with the draft, we potentially had a shot at Chase or Waddle or Devontae Smith, but they've made that decision to go with Saul. And do you know what? I think it's a great decision. I think Saul will be an absolutely generational talent. Maybe not this season, but he's going to be a guy that's going to be with us for 5, 6, 7 years. So
very much.
In terms of how they've built with the O-line, I mean, it's already good with Decker and Ragnar are like quality players. So I think we're going to have a top 10 O-line. And we've got DeAndre Swift. I know you're fond of him in Chicago after his drop. Yes.
Sorry, man. Hey, we're gonna be friends for almost every single game of the season except for 2.
The one thing I'll say about Swift is, after dropping that, I think that was the first game of the season, he drops the game-winning pass, but he didn't hide. I mean, like, he was back week 2 and catching balls. So, he came. That could have been career finishing if he'd lost his confidence. But he came back. We've got Jamal Williams, who I think the Packers have made a mistake in terms of letting go, because he looks a decent RB2. So I'm kind of like really excited about what they're doing with the offense. But I just think, like, if Golladay is going, keep Marvin Jones. Like, don't let Marvin Jones go as well. And there must have been a way that we could have got a wide receiver in free agency that is better than Tyrell Williams, who's always injured, Brashard Perriman, who's had a really kind of like nothing career. It's just really worrying. And we did draft a good guy called Amon-Ra St. Brown in the 4th or 5th round. But again, that's a big ask, asking him to step up and play slot and be as good as, say, like Golden Tate was a couple of years. I think we had Golden Tate, Golladay, and Marvin Jones Jr. only like 2 seasons ago. Oh my God, how that wide receiver room has emptied out of talent.
Well, Galladay especially. I went to Northern Illinois University where he played, and so as an alumni, I actually watched the team pretty closely. And for 2 seasons, NIU's offense was pass to Galladay, run, pass to Galladay, run. And I was thrilled to see you guys draft him. I mean that sincerely. And I was really kind of surprised to see you guys let him walk. I mean, I understand you guys are building and developing, but that's a damn good receiver right there. And I think whenever he's healthy, I mean, that the sky is the limit for him.
Yeah. So I think that's a real worry. And I think the other thing that we're worried about, I mean, I've been talking shit about your secondary, but our secondary, oh my Lord. Oh, well, our secondary, our linebacker core, our safety room. I mean, we've invested loads in the defense, and I think our defense line is going to be, Onzarike and Aleem McNeil, and we've got Aquara signed. So I think they're going to be a lot better, but they need to create some pressure because the secondary is worrying.
Yeah, and I go back to my original point of Dan Campbell. I don't understand the hire, but friends that I know and love that are Lions fans seem to feel somehow, some way that this one is different.
Mhm.
But I don't know if I heard the same thing about Matt Patricia. So I don't, you know, you guys, you have a head coaching hiring question mark. Just again.
Yeah, I think the positive for us is I think Campbell seems to be like a real figurehead. Um, but in terms of kind of the specialists, like I mean, Anthony Lynn was not a very good head coach with the Chargers, but you know, has been a really good coordinator. I mean, do not let him clock manage whatever you do. But you know, he is someone that I think is going to invigorate our offense. And everyone is kind of there's a real buzz about Aaron Glenn, the DC who's come from the Saints secondary, who's coached like Marshall and Lattimore. He seems to be a really good hire, and there seems to be a confidence that he can get the job done on defense. But I mean, our defense was, for me, the worst defense I've ever seen last year. It was just abysmal. So you know, the only way is up.
I hope so. You know, it's fun when we have a bit of rivalry, but it seems over the last, I don't know, 10 or so years that it's either the Lions year or it's the Bears year. And it's very rare that we split games anymore,
Mhm.
like we did this past season, where it's, hey, we're on top or you guys are on top. So we'll see what happens this season.
Yeah, I mean the game where we probably for Lions fans, I think there were like two highlights. There was like of last season. I mean, well, Patricia getting sacked, that was one highlight. Um, the Todd Gurley touchdown that should never have been when he just lost his mind and fell over the goal line was hilarious. And then the Bears game when we just sacked Patricia, Dal Bevel took over as coach. And, you know, I think you always get that bounce when a hated head coach is gone and then the players just have the freedom to play. And I think it was unfortunate for the Bears that you won the kind of receiving end that day.
It was a shock. I'm not going to lie to you. I think we've kind of become accustomed to the Bears, especially in the Matt Patricia era. For some reason, him deciding to switch to man coverage, which Mitch Trubisky was great at, and
Mhm.
it. In the NFL, you're going to win games you shouldn't, and you're going to lose games that you shouldn't. And I think Bears fans felt very strongly that was a game that they shouldn't have lost, that they did. But hey, that's why we watch. You never know what's going to happen.
So now we've talked about all the teams. Do you want to have a go at predicting, first of all, the order and then the kind of record of each four teams in the NFC North? Looking back last season, only the Packers had a winning record. So how do you think things are going to play out this season?
Well, now that there's 17 games, there's no 500. It's either you have a winning record or you have a losing record. So I with Aaron Rodgers coming back, I don't know how you can pick against Green Bay. I see them in the top spot, and then and a tie for second place. I see Chicago and the Vikings. I think the Chicago will surprise a little bit. I think the Vikings will surprise a little bit, and then bringing up the rear, I think the Lions. But hear me out on this, and I mean this sincerely. I think the wins will come more towards the end of the season for you guys, in an upward trajectory. I think that that at least seemingly from the outside that players want to play for Dan Campbell, and that does a lot, right?
Mhm.
Just thinking about when Lovie Smith was first hired, in that 2004 season, we're like, this isn't good, but all of a sudden you could start to see that things were trending upwards. And then 2005, 2006, it's one of the best Bears defenses since the '85 Super Bowl.
So do you think what do you think the sort of records of the Vikings and the Bears will be? Do you think you'll both squeak into the playoffs on what I don't know? What would that be?
Yeah, I
Nine and
don't.
eight, 10-7?
Well, yeah, exactly. So I've got Green Bay at 13-4, and I've
Mhm.
got both the Vikings and the Bears at 9-8, and then I've got the Lions at 5-12.
What's the Vegas over under on the Bears next season?
That's a great question, which I don't know the answer to. I don't think
I
there's
think the
high
Lions. I
expectation.
think the Lions is 5.5. I'm not sure what the Bears was.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not really sure, to be honest with you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think 9-8 kind of feels certainly possible for the Vikings. I think I think there's a lot more questions for the Bears than maybe the Vikings, because the Vikings is quite an established kind of roster. I guess my kind of last question is just on week one. So you're going to the Rams. You've got Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, looking down the barrel of those two guys. Do you think there's any way that they're going to put Fields in, or do you think putting them in that situation on prime time Sunday night game, do you think that would just be kind of like a suicide mission?
One of the reasons why they drafted him is because he plays well in the biggest field. I mean, the guy has played in national championships. The game isn't too big for him, but it's different when you're coming into the NFL. I think Andy Dalton, unless there's something crazy that happens in the preseason where Justin Fields just lights it up in every single play and is just electric, I think Andy Dalton is a starter. And honestly, as much as it pains me to say this, I think I kind of want that. I want Justin Fields to get in when he's ready. Aaron Donald, and this is crazy to say, he's probably the best player on defense in the entire NFL, or at least one of. He hasn't played very well against the Chicago Bears. He hasn't had a lot of sacks against the Chicago Bears since they played it. I don't know what it is, but Matt Nagy seems to have his number. And even Jalen Ramsey, a couple times, Darnell Mooney found his way past Jalen Ramsey, but Mitch Trubisky couldn't get him the ball. So we'll be curious to see what happens. I still have the Rams winning that game, but I'm going to watch and be cautiously optimistic about it.
I mean, that's a baptism of fire for Tevin Jenkins as well.
100%. So we'll see. I don't know if he's going to be your week one starter, but I would hope that Matt Nagy would be smart enough to give him a whole lot of help if that was the case, with a tight end, running back, something like that.
So would you be quite happy to see Fields maybe playing a few fourth quarters in, by sort of week 5, 6, 7, but not starting at any point in the season? If
he earns it, I want him to play. I think that the NFL rookie quarterback is not what it was 15, 20 years ago. You watch, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. A lot of these guys have come in as rookies and have played really, really well. Obviously, looking at Justin Herbert, holy cow, he lit it up for the Chargers. So it is possible if he earns it, if he is that guy, then yes, I want to see him play. I've got his shirt on, right? Like the hype is real for
You've committed there. You've fully committed.
Yes. I haven't bought the jersey yet. It's been in my inbox for a while, and I'm like, I don't know if I should do it or not. But I want to see him play. I want to see him do his thing. I am optimistic that this is the guy, but I just don't want to see him thrown in before he's ready.
So who do you think will take more snaps this season, Justin Fields or Jordan Love?
Justin Fields, yeah. Absolutely. If you watch some of those passes at practice, I mean, you try not to judge too hard, but woof, that guy looks just awful. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they see something I don't, but Jordan Love looks bad. He looks really bad.
Imagine being out there throwing the ball and you've got like Aaron Rodgers' eyes like boring into you like lasers from the sideline. Jeez.
You're not doing it good. You're not doing it well. Like that's all he's hearing in his head every single time he throws the ball, right?
Yeah. Good stuff. Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. An hour has flown by. Is there anything you would like to kind of plug or talk about from a bear down point of view before we go?
I would love for any of your listeners to give me a follow. I mean this sincerely. Respectful back and forth banter. I'm all for it. I'm not going to name call. We'll make fun of each other's teams, but I'm never going to ever make it personal. So at BDR Dengel, Dengel, please give me a follow, or just to see what's going on in Bears land. Anything that you want to see with what's going on, and obviously we would love to have you guys on our podcast as we get close to that season. So Steve, just truly, I love what you guys are doing over there, and I have an immense respect for the UK fans. I think when I first learned that there was such a passion by some of the UK fans, I thought, okay, but realizing that you guys know your stuff, you are just as I would say even more passionate, because the hours that you guys have to wake up for the games and all those things, I have an immense amount of respect for you guys and truly appreciate the opportunity to be on your show, man. Thank you so much.
No, we've really enjoyed having you. It's good to talk football, and yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting season, and I'm sure we will speak again. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. We are Roar the Lions. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Hit up our YouTube. Click that subscribe button. Follow me on Twitter, 0Dart40, and check out my columns for NFL Scotland. And also, I'll be writing the blog for Roar the Lions, and I'll be talking NFC North all the way through. Thanks to Ryan. We'll speak soon. Cheers,
Thanks,
everyone.
Steve.